Tsavo east, mid-morning. A lion emerged from the dry thicket, moving with a rhythm that was more collapse than stride. His front right leg dragged across the coarse dust, paw folding beneath him every few steps. Each rib stood out like dry bone beneath stretched skin, and his tail hung still. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't hunting. He was just moving, not toward anything but away from something behind him, perhaps too far gone to matter now. The brush behind had already fallen silent. He was the last thing left moving in it. The salt dust clung to his sides. Cracks ran across his muzzle where old scars met the new, dry season. There was no blood, not anymore, but the skin near his leg joint was bruised and raw, swollen just above the paw. He did not growl. He did not pause to scent the air. His ears stayed low, not flattened in fear, but folded from fatigue. He was thin, far beyond hunger. His movements had no urgency, only the slow insistence of something still alive because it hadn't yet stopped. Nearby, the wind tossed small pockets of dust across the open clearing, and a single hornbill skipped sideways through the scrub, watching but not disturbed. The lion didn't look at it. His eyes were unfocused, half-closed. He moved through the space like something half-remembered, not belonging here anymore, but not gone. His hind legs held up, barely. But each step with the front legs sent a shudder through his frame, like dry branches struggling to bend. If he lay down now, it wouldn't be sleep. It would be the last time he'd rise. The clearing curved gently toward the base of a low slope, and just beyond that, a faded track cut through the land. Not a road, not anymore, just a depression where tires had once pressed the dry grass. His head lifted slightly. One ear twitched at the sound of a distant rumble. A supply truck too far to reach, passed unseen. But he didn't move toward it. He kept his direction unchanged, a diagonal line across the dust, heading nowhere, toward nothing in particular. Half an hour passed before he reached the edge of a gnarled, fallen acacia, its branches twisted in sun-dried knots. He circled it once, each turn slower than the last, until his left side folded with a heavy, uneven sway. Then the front leg buckled again, and the rest of his body sank down. He didn't crash. He dropped like a sack that had been carried too long, slow, then sudden. His head landed on the curve of a root. His chest lifted once, then held. Then again, barely. Flies circled his flank. His tail flicked once, the movement so soft it could have been missed. His breathing returned, shallow but steady. Not restful, just proof he wasn't finished yet. Not entirely. A movement came from beyond the bend, too far to startle him. The lion didn't react. A distant figure paused on the hill above. Binoculars raised. A field ranger, checking for elephant paths through the dust, turned slightly, then stopped. The shape by the tree wasn't a rock or broken limb. It was too lean, too still. Not dead, but almost. The ranger didn't radio it in. Not yet. He just watched for a moment longer, letting the facts form clearly. A full-grown male collapsed. No sign of pride, no sign of wound. The walk, the limp, had said enough. If the lion stayed, he'd die. If he moved again, it would be his last effort. The ranger pulled the bottle from his side pouch and looked once more. He wasn't sure yet whether it was too late, but something about the way the lion had walked, not fallen, not called, not run, made him start down the hill, slowly. The wind picked up, dry and warm. It tugged at the brittle edge of the old tree's bark, shifting it with a soft rattle. The lion didn't lift his head. His eyes stayed half shut like someone waiting for the heat to pass. The ranger moved closer, quiet as the dust. The morning heat settled hard across the reserve as the lion reached the edge of the ranger outpost. His steps had grown erratic, one paw scuffing sideways as though the limb no longer responded to command. The wound on his shoulder had dried but not healed, pink and hot beneath the flies. Each breath came shallow, with a delay between the rise and the fall. He had covered more distance than anyone could have expected, tracing his path across dry ravines, thorn scrub, and half-crumbled flood beds. But now, just a few meters from shelter, he stopped. The electric perimeter fence stood low, barely 3 wires stretched between dull posts, humming softly. It was never designed for lions. It kept out hyenas, baboons, the occasional elephant calf. But not him. Not if he had wanted to cross. Instead, the lion lowered his head and folded to the ground just outside the outermost post. No growl. No attempt to test the line. He simply gave in to gravity, like a tree whose roots had given way. Inside the camp, Musa had just returned from his morning patrol. He was standing near the storage hut, rubbing salt from his wrists when he noticed the sudden stillness outside the east line. At first he thought it was shade, a dark patch where none had been before, but it didn't shift with the wind. It wasn't rock. He stepped forward, slowly, and raised his binoculars. Then he froze. The lion was down, chest faintly moving, head turned toward the camp, eyes open. There was no protocol for this. Lions didn't approach humans this way, not walking, not collapsing inches from camp. It wasn't desperation that moved Musa, not exactly. It was recognition. He had seen this once before, years ago, when a leopard cub, too weak to hide, had curled near the steps of the radio station and waited for whatever came next. Musa didn't call it in, not yet. He moved to the edge of the wire. He knelt low, hands open. The lion didn't lift his head. His flanks rose twice, slower than before. One eye twitched. His tail didn't move. "This one didn't come to fight," Musa said quietly. Behind him, 2 junior rangers emerged from the shade of the water tanks, eyes wide, unsure if they should bring weapons or keep their distance. Musa held out one hand, palm back. "Stay," he said. "He's not crossing." The fence gave off a low hum, like a wire string plucked slow. The lion lay only a pace from it. The electricity would sting, but not kill, not unless he tried to force through. And yet he didn't move. His paw rested just beside a coil of dry grass that brushed against the lowest wire with the wind. He could have stepped through with no resistance. Musa stepped back, then moved to the water drum. He filled a plastic bladder and returned, this time kneeling just beyond the fence line. He placed the bladder down and loosened the nozzle, letting a small stream of water run into the dirt. The ground drank fast. The lion didn't shift. Another moment passed. Musa stayed crouched, arms across his knees, eyes steady on the lion's chest. There was no fear between them, just stillness. The kind that filled the air when something delicate decided whether it would hold on or release. The sun had risen higher now, laying heat across the lion's back like weight. Musa moved again, this time laying a small cut of cloth soaked in water beside the fence, careful not to let it touch the wire. Still no movement. "If he crossed, we'd have to cage him," one of the rangers said behind him. Musa didn't answer. He already knew. Inside the fence, there was protocol. Quarantine, reports, alerts. But outside, here, they could still choose care over control. At least for now. The lion closed his eyes. "If he sleeps too long, he won't get up," Musa said quietly. They had hours at most, maybe less. Musa stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees, and walked toward the satellite phone, not to report a threat, but to request help. Behind him, the lion remained still, unmoving but not gone. The wires hummed their soft warning, untouched. He had come as close as trust would allow. The heat thickened by midday, pressing down like a second skin over the clearing. Cicadas called in waves from the thorn trees. And the dust no longer moved with the breeze. It simply hung. The lion hadn't shifted in nearly an hour. His body, splayed just beyond the wires, looked more like something discarded than alive. His chest still rose, barely. But the rhythm had slowed, shallow and distant. Musa returned with the water. No radio, no sedation, no team. Just a soft canvas bladder pressed between his arms and the quiet certainty that waiting longer would end this. He crouched slowly, planting his knees into the dirt, and set the bladder down near the lion's head. The lion did not flinch, not when the ground shifted, not when the water sack brushed the dry grass. The bladder was fitted with a rubber nozzle, flexible, low flow, worn from months of field use. Musa twisted the valve open, letting a slow trickle fall onto the ground, forming a dark patch that disappeared almost immediately into the thirsty earth. He kept his hand steady. The lion's eyes were half-lidded, unfocused. Not fear, not aggression, just absence. Whatever had carried him here had left him now. Musa inched the nozzle closer, letting a few droplets run down the lion's muzzle. Still no movement. He placed the bladder gently beside the lion's face, angled so the mouthpiece hung just near the lower jaw. Then he sat back, arms folded over his knees, and waited. Minutes passed. A fly landed near the lion's eye. His ear twitched once, then again. His nose flared slightly, as if scenting something vague, distant. Musa didn't move. He blinked slowly, matching the lion's breath, watching not for change but for decision. Then, almost imperceptibly, the lion's tongue shifted. It rose from between his teeth, touched the corner of the nozzle, then pulled back. Musa exhaled quietly through his nose. The tongue moved again, slower this time, but deliberate, curling around the mouthpiece with a dry, uncertain grip. A few drops disappeared into his mouth, then more. He drank like something learning how again, not in gulps, not in need, but in fragments. Pauses between each attempt. His throat worked to pull even the smallest amount as though each swallow required thought. Musa kept his body still. His eyes followed the lion's every shift, noting how his front leg remained stiff, angled awkwardly beneath him, unmoved since the collapse. It took 20 minutes for the lion to finish the first liter, another hour for the second. Musa refilled once from the backup container. By the time the third liter passed, the lion's eyes had opened wider, not alert, but present. He blinked once, slowly, as if acknowledging the light again. Then he stopped, his tongue pulled back. His jaw rested in the dust, and for the first time in hours, his breathing evened. Not deeper, not stronger, but steadier, like something settling into the thin space between exhaustion and survival. If he sleeps now, he might live, Musa said, more to the dirt than anyone else. The other rangers kept their distance, watching from the camp edge, unsure whether this counted as success or waiting. The bladder rested empty beside the lion's jaw, its valve tilted upward like a finished offering. The sun had begun its tilt westward, softening the harshness across the ground. Shadows crept in again from the brush line. The wind returned, gentle, brushing dust from the lion's back in slow strokes. He didn't move again that afternoon. But he didn't fade either. Sometimes, Musa knew, stillness wasn't surrender. It was the body's only way to hold on. The sky dimmed by slow degrees, shifting from pale white heat to the muted amber of early evening. Shadows lengthened across the clearing, turning the lion's shape from flesh to outline, a low ridge of ribs, a bent foreleg, a still tail. He had not moved in hours, not even to blink. Musa sat just beyond the wires, where the fence sagged slightly near the old thorn bush. He hadn't left his post since the last liter of water was drained. The lion's breathing had stayed even for a while, soft but real. But now, something had changed. It was the rhythm first, a longer pause between each rise of the chest, then a hesitation before the next breath came. Musa leaned forward. He looked at the lion's side, then at his eyes. They were open but unfocused, not scanning, not closing against the wind, just fixed, clouded, as if the light had entered but not settled. Musa reached for the small handheld radio clipped to his belt. His thumb hovered a second longer than usual over the call button. Then he pressed it. Vet support. Priority request. 1 lion, full collapse. Location, East Wire perimeter. Urgent, but non-aggressive. Repeat, non-aggressive. Breathing shallow. No visible movement for 90 minutes. The line crackled, followed by static. Then a calm voice replied, Acknowledged. Closest mobile unit at Kiboko Flatlands. ETA 2 hours minimum. Can you administer fluids? Musa looked again at the lion. His skin had drawn tighter since morning. Even the flies had reduced. Not chased away, but losing interest. Negative. No IV. No sedation. He's too far for that now, Musa replied. Understood. Do not engage directly. Stay clear. He lowered the radio. 2 hours, if they even made it. Behind him, the other rangers lingered near the edge of the food store, whispering in low voices. No one stepped closer. Not out of fear, but reverence. The quiet people give to something they're afraid is slipping. Musa moved a few steps closer to the wires, kneeling again on dry earth. He studied the lion's face. The dust had begun to coat his lashes. His tongue was no longer visible. His lower jaw rested in a patch of soil that had darkened earlier from spilled water. That patch had dried now, crusted with salt. He reached gently for a cloth, soaked again from the backup container, and laid it beyond the fence line. Not on the lion, just near. A small thing. Coolness, scent, a chance to stir something in the body that memory might still hold. If he sleeps now, Musa said quietly, he won't wake. The statement wasn't dramatic. It was simple fact. The body was closing. Not from injury, but from depletion. Like a light left flickering too long, dimming not in flame, but in weight. Musa stayed there as the sun slipped low, not speaking, just watching, hoping the chest would rise again. It did. Once. Then again. Smaller. Still present. He didn't call it in again. Nothing had changed. Not enough to update, not enough to give hope. The wind picked up softly, rustling the grasses that bordered the clearing. Somewhere far off, a francolin called once, then fell silent. And just before night fully arrived, the lion blinked. Not quickly, not with strength, but fully. A slow lid closing, then opening once more. Musa exhaled. The breath had returned. Barely, but it was there. He pulled the radio close, pressed the button again. He's still breathing, he said. I'll stay here. And he did. As night settled and the wind cooled, Musa sat watch. A man beside a dying lion, one breath away from silence, but not yet there. Not yet. Dawn came with a dull red glow over the eastern brush. The light was soft, but the heat had already begun to build. It clung low to the ground, rising from the dust like breath. Musa stood quietly beside the gatehouse, watching the lion from a distance. He hadn't moved during the night. No turns, no head lifts, just breathing, slow and shallow, like a clock running out. The vet team had not arrived. Their truck was stuck behind a washed-out section near the river crossing, delayed until mid-morning at best. Musa had stopped checking the radio after the last call confirmed another hour lost. That left him with what was already here. 1 water bladder, a wrapped bundle of meat from the cold box, a dull multi-tool, and a lion no longer strong enough to defend himself but still too proud to ask. Musa walked the line of the perimeter fence, scanning each post until he reached a sag in the wire near the far edge, an old section, loose from last season's windstorm. He knelt, pulled the tool from his belt, and with 2 precise cuts, severed the lowest wire. It didn't snap. It folded with a soft tremble, curling back toward the dry grass. The perimeter was breached. He stepped through. It was not a decision taken lightly. There was no sedative in his kit, no protective rifle slung over his back, no assistant watching his steps from the shade. Just Musa, alone in the wild, carrying a bladder of water in one hand and a packet of cold goat meat in the other. He walked slow. The lion's body hadn't shifted since evening. His eyes remained open but unblinking, glassed with the film that comes just before the end. Musa crouched 6 feet away and sat down, legs crossed, setting the bladder between them. He opened the meat slowly, letting the scent rise with the warming air. The lion didn't react. Musa didn't reach for him. Instead, he began placing the food on the ground in a small semicircle, not close, not far. Each piece laid down gently, like an offering left without expectation. Then he loosened the bladder nozzle and let a slow drip fall beside the lion's paw. Still no movement. Musa spoke only once. "I'm not here to take you," he said. The words were flat, not coaxing, just truth. Then silence. The flies hovered, confused by the stillness but drawn to the warmth. Musa swatted them away from the lion's eyes with the back of his hand, careful not to touch the skin. The lion's ears twitched once, just once, then stilled. Another drip from the bladder struck the dirt, darker than the rest. Musa leaned in, just enough to place the nozzle closer to the lion's mouth. This time, it brushed the edge of his lip. A reflex. Maybe, or something deeper, made the lion's tongue twitch. It flicked once against the rubber. Musa didn't smile. He didn't move. He waited. After several minutes, the tongue moved again. Then the jaw. The mouth opened slightly as if confused, but the water entered. One small pull, then another. Beside it, the scent of meat warmed in the sun. For the first time in nearly 20 hours, the lion shifted. His head lifted an inch. His body trembled from the effort, but it rose. He didn't eat. Not yet, but he turned, just slightly, toward the man sitting beside him. Musa didn't reach out. He only nodded, slow. The vet team wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours. But something had already turned. The breach in the wire hadn't brought danger. It had made space for presence, for choice, for something fragile to decide whether it wanted to stay. And this time, it did. The sun rose higher, stripping the shadows from the clearing and laying heat across the lion's back like weight. His breathing had steadied, but his body remained slack against the earth, muscles loose from the long depletion. He didn't lift his head again, but his eyes followed Musa now, not sharply, not with threat, but with the slow, unblinking gaze of something unsure whether it still belonged in the world around it. Musa remained seated just out of reach, his legs folded, hands resting on the pack in his lap. The meat lay in small pieces around the lion, none close enough to startle, none too far to tempt. The lion had turned his head once toward the scent, but had not moved since. His body still trembled at the ribs every few breaths, but the weakness didn't hide the strength beneath. Even like this, he was power resting just below the surface. And Musa knew it. He reached slowly into the pack and placed another slice of meat onto the soil, closer this time. Not by much, just a hand's width. Then he leaned back again and waited. The acacia above them shifted gently with the breeze, its branches thin and knotted, casting broken lines of shade across the lion's side. Flies circled but landed less now, the change in scent subtle, but real. Not death, not quite. Minutes passed, then a shift. The lion's tongue appeared first, dry but sure, moving along his upper lip like something testing memory. Then the jaw flexed. A soft sound, barely audible, escaped. Not a growl, not a sigh, but the creak of air pushing through tired muscle. His front paw twitched once, scraped the dirt, his nose angled toward the meat. He did not look at Musa. He looked at the soil. Then, with deliberate care, he moved. Just the head, just enough to stretch his neck forward. His mouth opened, teeth yellow and cracked and closed around the first piece of meat. He didn't tear. He pulled it into his mouth and let it rest there, unmoving, before swallowing without chewing. Musa watched without shifting. No praise, no words, just stillness. The lion took another, then stopped. One paw moved forward a few inches, testing the ground beneath. His foreleg was stiff, still swollen at the joint, but it held just enough for a shift in weight. He adjusted his body slightly, settling back into the shade, head turned now toward Musa. Not fully, but enough. The silence deepened between them. Musa reached again into the pack, took the last strip of meat, and placed it at the edge of the lion's reach. The lion's eyes followed the movement, but did not narrow. He blinked, slow, then rested his head back against the dirt. A slow breath passed between them. It was not trust, not yet. But it wasn't threat either. It was something else, the space between what had been feared and what had not yet formed. Musa stayed there, unmoving, until the flies thinned and the heat reached its peak. The lion's eyes closed again, not in surrender, but in permission. He was still watching, just no longer guarding. Above them, the branches shifted again. A thorn pod dropped beside Musa's foot, landing soft in the dust. He didn't flinch. They sat together beneath the acacia, man and lion, each with nothing to say and everything to lose. And for the first time since the lion had come out of the brush, the quiet no longer felt like waiting for the end. The morning of the 5th day began without ceremony. No clouds, no wind. Just the slow shift of light over the red dust and the steady hum of insects returning to their rhythm. Musa arrived early, as he had every day, moving through the broken wire with the same quiet steps, carrying a fresh water bladder and a strip of meat wrapped in canvas. The lion was there, in the same place beneath the acacia, but something in the way he lay told Musa it wouldn't be for much longer. The swelling in the lion's leg had eased. The joint was still stiff, still raw at the bend, but the heat had faded. His ribs no longer rose and fell with visible effort, and his eyes, those glassy, sun-faded eyes, had cleared. He watched Musa approach now with full awareness, not indifference, and yet still he did not move. Musa crouched as usual, placing the meat on the soil and tilting the water bladder against a low root. He didn't speak. Words had become rare between them, unnecessary. The silence had its own structure now, a language formed from presence, not sound. And so, he waited. The lion blinked. Then, for the first time, he turned his head fully toward Musa. Not a glance, not a sideways study, a full, deliberate movement, neck lifting with effort, chin rising just above the crook of his folded paw. His gaze met Musa's without hesitation and held there. Musa did not look away. The lion didn't growl. He didn't tense. His ears stayed upright, relaxed. His mouth remained closed. There was no test, no show of dominance, just watching. Like a question asked softly with no demand for answer. Musa gave the smallest nod, not in challenge but in witness. He had seen lions rise before, after sedation, after injury, after drought. But never like this. Never when the rising was entirely the lion's own. The lion blinked again. Then he moved, first the paw, then the weight. His front leg unfolded, slow but firm, and he pressed it into the ground. A tremble ran through his shoulder, but he held. His hindquarters shifted next, pushing against the soil. And then, with a long, exhaled breath, he stood. Not tall, not strong, not yet, but on all 4 feet. Dust clung to his flank, outlining where he'd lain for days. His back legs shook slightly, recalibrating balance, but he adjusted without panic. The stiffness in his front leg bent him into a low stance, uneven, but upright. Alive and upright. Musa didn't move. The lion looked down once at the meat, then left it. He turned away, just slightly, toward the open land beyond the brush line. His head lifted, catching a breeze that carried the scent of dry trees, baked earth, maybe distant herds. He didn't limp forward. He didn't retreat. He just stood there, facing the land he had come from, as if remembering it. Then, for a moment longer, he turned his head back to Musa. Not quickly, just a second glance. And in that brief exchange, no sound, no movement, something passed between them. Recognition, not ownership, not gratitude. Just the simple, solemn knowing of one life watching another keep still long enough to stay. Then the lion stepped forward, and the dust rose behind him. The sun hung low over Savo's open scrub, casting long gold shadows across the worn path that curved between brush and sky. The heat had softened by now, retreating into the hills behind, leaving only warmth and dust in its place. The lion stood near the edge of the clearing, tail flicking once, ears still. He had not moved all day since rising, but something in his posture had shifted. He faced the road now, not in flight, not in caution, just aligned. Musa watched him from a few meters back. He had brought no food this time, only a fresh bladder of water which remained unopened. The lion had not needed it. He had eaten from the dirt that morning, taken water directly from the basin laid beside the acacia root. He had rested with eyes closed, not in collapse, but in patience. Waiting for something he hadn't shown until now. Then, just before sunset, he stepped forward. One pace, then two. The limp was still there, but it no longer held him down. His body swayed with the motion, slow but true. He did not veer toward the scrub or the shade. He walked along the road, not on it, but beside it, parallel, like something remembering where paths go but unwilling to follow the tracks made by others. Musa followed, not too close, not leading, just a few steps behind. The lion didn't look back. The dust lifted gently with each paw, brushing against low grass in swirls. His ribs no longer showed with every breath. His side had begun to fill out again, subtly, like the land itself recovering after a long, dry spell. The silence stretched between them in rhythm. Footfall, breath, footfall, breath. It was not dramatic. It was not a return. It was motion, and that was enough. A distant engine sound broke the quiet, low and steady, moving fast across the dry plain. Musa didn't turn. The lion didn't pause. The noise grew closer. Then the glint of a truck appeared at the far ridge, white roof flashing against the sun. The vet team had arrived. The vehicle slowed as it approached, kicking up a trail of dust. It stopped just beyond the curve, near the place where Musa had first found the lion's body days ago. The driver opened the door, stepped out halfway. Musa raised his hand before a word could be spoken. "He's already going," he said. The vet stood still, one hand on the door. He looked at the lion, then at Musa, then gave a single nod. No one moved toward the animal. No dart, no cage, no interference. The lion kept walking. Ahead, the path curved gently toward the escarpment, where trees grew low and dense and the wind came in cooler at dusk. He did not rush. He did not falter. And Musa kept behind him, not guiding, not guarding, simply present. The road would narrow soon, split toward the river or rise into the broken slope above. But whichever way he chose, it would be on his own legs. When the lion finally paused, it was at the edge of a dry ravine. The sun behind him lit the edge of his shoulders in pale gold. He stood still for a moment, tail moving with the breeze. Then, without a sound, he stepped down the ridge and disappeared from view. Musa stood at the top, watching the dust settle. No farewell. No sign. Just the slow return of something once nearly gone. He turned back toward the camp as the wind picked up. The dust swirled briefly around his boots, then drifted on ahead, following the path the lion had taken, quiet, low, and open to the wild.